Hi everyone, today I am sitting here with Jeremy McLellan. He is a talented stand-up comedian and writer celebrated for his unique blend of humor and thought-provoking insights. So today we're going to interview him and ask a little bit about his early life and career, and also how culture plays a role in that. So let's start with your background. So you mentioned that you grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. Right. What were some of your earliest comedic influences and inspirations?
You know, so I had a great aunt, Jewel, which is my daughter's name as well. But my great aunt Jewel was really funny, and she was the same sense of humor. And I think that's where I got it. And she was sort of my surrogate grandmother. Yeah, so I think her, and then I always liked tricking people, like lying and getting away with it and playing tricks on people. And I think there's something about comedy that does that, where you're kind of, you're leading people down a path with language and then flipping things. And so I always really enjoyed that. But I didn't become a comedian until I think I was 27, I think. And then before comedy, I worked with people with intellectual disabilities since the age of like 15. That was like most of what I did for my life. And there's something about that too that is, if you're good at it, if you're a good caregiver and not a bad one, then you learn to sort of live with mess and live with the kind of the chaos that comes from being with people with disabilities and the unexpected surprises. And comedy is essentially, I think, I think we laugh when we're surprised by something good. I think that's what comedy is. And there's something beautiful about that, and there's something also that if you can surprise someone with something good and make them laugh, that is a very deep connection that I love, and that can get past a lot of things, a lot of differences, but you also have to learn about the person. You have to see the world the way they see it in order to kind of empathize, in order to make that connection. So that's what I love about it, and that's kind of how I got started. Yeah.
I love that. I like that you mentioned your aunt instead of like a famous comedian.
Oh yeah. Well, I do have favorite comedians, but typically with other comedians, there's like one thing that I like about them that I take from them. So I might like someone's timing, another person's crowd work, another person I might like their just outlook on the world, and then so I sort of take bits and pieces from everybody, and then hopefully I'm my own person.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about your religious upbringing. How did that and social justice activism influence your decision to pursue a career in stand-up?
Well, so I was raised very conservative Protestant, and then later became Catholic, which for people who aren't Christian, just like, well, whatever. But in terms of how I was raised, that was a big deal. And becoming Catholic, but then also being a caregiver who worked with people who were intellectually disabled and who were Muslim. And so it was an interesting relationship to have, and that influenced obviously my desire for social justice, in the sense that what we were doing in those communities was peace and was justice, and then you can point to that as a demonstration of what you're hoping to achieve on a larger scale. I think that's one thing that separates us, and by us I mean you and me, from maybe people who see justice as just something in the future, something to be achieved later. When I think both Christianity and Islam both maintain that like justice and like the kingdom of God is something that's here and that we do achieve, and we can point to it, and we want it on a larger scale. So we're not postponing it. So hanging out with people with disabilities, hanging out with Muslims, and finding a way to connect and be good friends with each other. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here for friendship with each other and with God. So,
yeah. I love that. So you mentioned, your connection to Christianity, and that's kind of a unique position to be in, being in comedy and being a devout Christian.
Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit, but have you faced any unique challenges or stereotypes in pursuing a career?
I think in Hollywood you're allowed to have been raised religious, and then so there's lots of comedians who were sort of born Catholic, and then they talk about their life as this movement away from religion towards like this beautiful and there's a real pressure to sort of narrate your story that way. I know that it would be very easy, and people would love it people in terms of the industry would love it if I sort of pitched myself as I was raised very bigoted. But then gradually, I met people, and then I became, and there's a lot of pressure to have that story. That's not true. I wasn't raised bigoted, and it's true that I didn't know anything about Islam, and I had to learn about it and everything. But in terms of my upbringing, in terms of, and actually, throughout my life, I've become more religious, more serious about my faith, and that's definitely not a movement. That's to them, that's like going from an iPhone to a flip phone. You're going the wrong way. And the friends I have who are Muslim, who have kind of followed a similar trajectory, find that too, where no, that's not the story they want to hear. They want to hear that all of history is moving towards more, I guess, stereotypically liberal sensibilities about religion, and sort of that it's sort of something you were born with, that you kind of it kind of goes away a little bit, and you become more chill, more. But I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if history is actually moving that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that you, depending on what audience it is, what type of audience it is that you're, doing a show for, you kind of, will cater your comedy to that kind of group.
And really, it's just, maybe there might be a story about me going to Pakistan that I don't have to provide context for when I talk to a Pakistani crowd. I'll just say when I'm in Lahore, and then I'll just tell the story. If I'm doing it for a crowd of people who are not Muslim, not Pakistani, just like a Catholic crowd or something, I might still tell the story, but I'll have to frame it a different way. I'll have to introduce it a bit more. I'll have to kind of explain why I'm there. And this is definitely true when I perform for a Muslim audience, and most of the people don't know who I am. Where I have to kind of right off the bat sort of explain what in the world. I have to establish very quickly that I'm not Muslim, but I love you guys, and that's so I have to. The first joke or story I tell has to establish that, so that they're not sort of realizing halfway through that I'm not Muslim, or they don't think I'm making fun of something, that I'm what I'm talking about is out of love, and I'm sort of I'm allowed to say this. The very first 5 minutes of a set are very crucial to establishing who you are and your relationship to the audience. You kind of have to build goodwill, okay, and then you spend it making fun of them. That's how I think about it, right? If you build goodwill and never spend it, you're a hack. And if you don't build goodwill, but try to spend it, it's terrible. It's not even comedy. It's just horror at that point.
I think having, someone like you who's a devout Christian and coming into, mosques and doing comedy shows, I think it really kind of pushes the agenda further for an interfaith kind of community.
Right.
Because, like you said, you want to make sure that, the audience understands that you're not there to, criticize their religion. It's more so, just to get that dialogue started.
Yeah, and there's, I travel a lot. I'm in airports a lot, and I think about the airport chapels. And there's two kinds of airport chapels, and I guess each airport has a decision to make about this. But some airport chapels, they're like interfaith spaces, okay? And they, you go in there and it is completely blank. It's basically an empty room, maybe some swirls on the wall, just to sort of seem spiritual or whatever. Maybe dimmer lighting or something, which is great if you need to sleep when you're at an airport. That, I think, is what a lot of people mean by interfaith, where let's find the lowest common denominator between Muslim and Christian.
Yeah.
And what's the stuff that we can both agree on, right? But then when we do that, I think we just end up inventing a third religion that neither of us believe in. The other airport chapels, which I like more, are the ones that are just cluttered with religious stuff. And there's like prayer mats, and then there's like a cross, and like there's like a place where someone can say mass, but then there's also like a pointing to the Qibla, right? And it's just like it's a mess. And throughout history, history's full of places, civilizations that were messy like that, where people weren't in America, there's the idea, at least now, that in order to live in peace, we have to kind of just live in this sort of barren, religion aside, let's just connect as people. And it's just like this, let's not talk about any differences, et cetera. But history's full of situations where there were Christian cities next to Muslim cities, and people were living on top of each other, and there were competing legal systems where Jews would sue each other under Sharia, right? And it's this weird complicated mess of places, and that is actually the most successful in terms of longevity that we've had in terms of religions coexisting. So how do we achieve pluralism that's chunky, as I like to say, chunky pluralism where you're not just blending everything? And I think that's the question right now in the world, is how do we do that without making people feel like they have to give up the most important things in their life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very pertinent in our world today,
right,
especially
for sure.
with the current events. So you've touched on a lot of this, and you mentioned talking about performing in Pakistan. So you've, in addition to Pakistan, you've performed in various countries all over the world. How do you adapt your comedy to different cultural audiences, and especially when you're dealing with sensitive things like politics or religion, like controversial topics?
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes there's just rules. First of all, when I perform in a country like Pakistan, we don't let people film in the audience.
Okay.
We're very strict about that, because for all I know, there's going to be a clip of a 5-second clip of me saying something about the Quran and people laughing, and then it's he's making fun, and who knows what's going to happen then, right? So we don't let people film, and then also in Pakistan, no one has ever told me any rules about what to do. But my rule has always been that as a comedian, you can joke about anything, any topic. Any topic is okay, but you have to do it in front of those people. So if you're white and you got some great jokes that you think are great about black people, great. Go tell them at a club that's a black club and see how it goes. And if you're scared to do it, or you're it's not going to work there, well, then it's not a good joke, right? Because it's not, and not because it's insensitive. Whether you offend someone or not is not, I think, a moral. I don't think offense is very much a moral category, because whether someone has an emotional reaction to something you say isn't necessarily your responsibility. But I think it's more important to talk about doing injustice with words. And that is something that comedians don't talk about, because nobody wants to think about justice when it comes to their industry, right? But if you misrepresent something that people love in the audience and they hate you for it, then that's fine. They should hate you for it. But if you can find a way to sort of, be funny, which means surprising them. So what you say has to be surprising, but it also has to be good. Then you can make that connection, and that's the connection that I love. That's what I live for. I don't do drugs, but that's the closest thing I have to drugs, is when you have people who are totally different from you, supposedly, and you are able to make them laugh. And I think that connects to my past working with people who, with disabilities, many of whom were nonverbal. Right, you have a guy who's nonverbal, he's autistic, and he's suddenly very upset all the time, and you don't know why. And somehow, this actually happened, but somehow we figure out that it's because the laundry detergent changed, and the clothes he's wearing are uncomfortable. And then you change that, and he's fine. that is just like, oh, it's like you've like not just like the detective work involved in doing that, but you've connected to that person. Being able to do that to anyone, someone who with a disability, someone who's like someone who's Muslim from Pakistan, right? Like being able to sort of say something that makes them laugh and like make that connection. It means that there is something to being human and something inside of me that connects, that makes sense, and I just love that. But yeah, so being able to do that. I don't think a lot about sensitivity in the sense of I don't want to make people mad. That's not what I think about. I think more about like how do I make a like deep connection to them, and if you're insulting or belittling something they love, then it's not like you're not actually making a connection to them. Usually you're wrong about it. Usually you're just speaking out of ignorance and you're not connecting. So that's what I think about.
A side note there, I just want to say I appreciate that you're, talking about working with intellectually disabled children, I believe you mentioned.
Oh, they were adults. Basically, but yeah.
I think that's, very important work, so I appreciate you highlighting that as well. So we've talked a lot about specifically targeted audiences. What happens when you perform at an interfaith event where there's sort of multiple religious backgrounds that you're speaking to? Is there a different kind of...
Yeah, so again, like, going to like the chapel thing, it's not like, oh, I'll just do material that everyone will understand. Because sometimes it's funny when you do a joke that only one group of people understand and the other group doesn't. And then they have to like ask the people at their table, like, what is he talking about? Like, where is Optibod? Like, whatever kind of... like sometimes that's funny. Sometimes doing, pitting the audience against each other. So, and so I like the chunky stuff. I like the, doing material that, I hope that people who, like at this, interfaith event, people who are not the target audience for each joke will, find stuff that they do connect with. But again, you have to introduce it and sort of structure it in a way so that people who are not, and I'm not going to like do jokes in Urdu, right? Like for, if like half the audience is Arab and to just leave it at that, right? I might, so I like whenever I do say something in Urdu, I might like also say it in English or whatever. So, so you have to adapt it in that sense, but
find the balance.
Right.
Let's talk about the impact that comedy has on the world in terms of social issues. How do you see comedy as a tool for social change and fostering understanding between different cultures and religions?
Sure. So in terms of, comedy is kind of, jokes are sort of deconstructive. You're sort of deconstructing concepts. You are sometimes clearing away misconceptions and ignorance. And in that sense, you are keeping, like the role of the jester, like to the king. He has to remind the king that he's human, and I think that is a big role of the comedian. And now we live in a democracy, and so the king is technically the voter, and so, but you're still the jester. You're still supposed to be addressing like their limitations. You are reminding them that they are human, that they are fallible. Some people do not like that, but it is an act of love to do that, because hopefully they listen. If you can find a way to do it in a way that makes a connection, then you are freeing them from that illusion, from that, and then because if reality is good, which we believe it is, then clearing misconceptions away will allow someone to actually have a connection to reality, and that's a very good thing. When it comes to like social justice, I think of when people talk about comedy and social justice, a lot of times they talk about it the way that Christians talk about it sometimes, where like the jokes are like ways to convince people to convert or something. And the same thing is true of social justice. Are your jokes do they have an agenda where like, okay, I'm going to get them to think about this, and then I'm going to write the joke that way? That's not a good way to write jokes. You have to be very free with your jokes. You have to just follow the joke where it leads. You don't want people just clapping for you because they agree with you. You want them laughing because they're surprised by what you said. But I think at a deeper level, comedy, like what we are doing, is play. It is something that we do when there's. I mean, this is what we do when there's nothing else to do. We sit around and joke. This is what we do with friends. And that's the point of life. That's like Aristotle said, the closest thing to contemplation is watching a child play, and that is what we are doing. It is just delighting in each other, and so, comedy is not some tool that we use to achieve something else necessarily. I think of it more as like, this is it. This is this kind of love that we are showing towards each other, being friends with each other, joking around with each other. This is it. This is the purpose of life, and everything else politically is to make this happen, to make it possible that we can do this. Make it possible that we can play. So we pass laws so that people have leisure time. And we do that, I can make jokes to like advocate for that, but really we do that so that people can sit around and make jokes. So people can like sit around and play with their kids. And when somebody can't do that, when somebody is overworked so they can't go to the masjid on Friday and because their boss is making them, that's an act of injustice. And but the purpose of it is to have that leisure. And by leisure, I don't mean just I mean something very rich where it's like the purpose we are here for, and so we are trying to achieve that. So everything that we do in terms of social justice is to just let people play.
I have a follow-up question to that. So you mentioned in your answer talking about taking the joke wherever it kind of leads you.
When you write.
When you write.
When you write jokes, not necessarily when you tell them.
Okay, so I was going to ask how much improv is involved in.
For sure.
Things of.
So I know what jokes I'm going to tell when I go on stage. I have a set list, and I don't just stream of consciousness on stage. I pretend that I do. And then, that's part of the act. But when you write, you shouldn't have any hang-ups. You shouldn't be trying to make a point that you really want to put into a comedic way. You should just be very, very free. Now, when you decide whether to tell it or not, then you get into ethical questions about, is this the right audience? Is this something? Is this belittling? Is this too mean to them? Is it too pandering to them? But when you write, you should just write whatever. And this is what comedians do when we sit around and talk, is that the conversations just go in insane places, okay? And there's stuff that I would not say on stage or in public, but that's the process. You write and then you edit later. If you edit while you write, then you get brain lock. You get a writer's block, basically. You
want it to be a freeing process, at least when you're writing. Let's end with some personal and professional goals. So in terms of what you want to continue doing and how you want to expand the stand-up that you're working on now, what are your future plans for your comedy career, and are there any specific projects that you're working on?
I feel like I didn't get here by planning. If I when I started, I'm gonna become famous in Pakistan. Whatever, there's no. I just say yes to everything. If people ask me to do something, if people invite me to a place to perform, I'll say yes. And I remember the first Muslim show I did. They were like, "Do you have 45 minutes of Muslim material?" And I said yes, and I didn't. And then I was like, well, I got 3 months to write it, so I did, and it went great. But I just yes and everything, and then just take it where it leads. And so I have no idea where I'm going to be in 5 years or 10. So we'll see.
I think that applies to a lot of the younger generation as well, because when you're starting out in, let's say you just graduated college and you don't know what you want to go into, it can be challenging I'll speak for myself, it was difficult for me to be like, okay, where do I go from here? Because there's so many options, and you want to, plan the best for your future. But to your point, I think sometimes it's important to just kind of let it flow however.
Right, yeah, you have, it's important to have a good habit, good habits, a good routine, a good system,
Yep.
like a good personal system. Long-term goals, I don't know if they're like that helpful. Sometimes they can constrain you.
Yeah.
But
let's end with this last question. What advice would you give to young comedians, especially those from diverse backgrounds who are trying to break into the industry?
So I got advice when I first started and it was by a comedian who was really dirty. He was a really dirty comedian, and he gave me advice, and he said to work clean. He said to write clean. So when you start doing comedy, it's very easy to write really dirty, and I think that's kind of a crutch when you start out. Now later you can be dirty, whatever, you know, it's whatever you want to do. But if you can find a way to write jokes that are surprising to people without being vulgar.
Is that just because it's more controversial to write?
Yeah, it's easier, I think, sometimes. Well, I mean, maybe not anymore, because, I mean, what hasn't been said? I feel like we're done with it. It's kind of like, well, I don't know what new vulgarity are they going to invent that's going to be really shocking? Like, we've heard it all now. But, you know, like a few decades ago, you say something vulgar and people are shocked and they're surprised and they laugh. Now it's kind of not as shocking anymore, but I think it makes it easier to surprise people when you do that. But if you can find a way to do it without that, and force yourself to do that, and also like find the stuff. I mean, like the first thing you learn is just how to tell jokes, how to connect with an audience, how to do crowd work. I think most people start out good at one of those. If you're interested in comedy, you start out doing one of those. I was good at joke writing. I was not good on stage. I wasn't good at talking to people. Wasn't good at connecting at all. But I was good at writing good jokes, like structurally. And so then you work on the other stuff. Some people start out, they're great at crowd work and they can't write a joke to save their lives. And so you work on whatever you're lacking. Yeah. But really it's just you need to hang out with other comedians and you need to go to open mics. I'm sorry, they're at bars. I'm sober, I don't drink, and it sucks that like they pay you in drink tokens, and then if you don't drink, you don't spend them.
I had no idea.
Yeah, they pay. That's like people are like, why do comedians die so early? And I'm like, well, you start out, they pay you in alcohol.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically that's how it is, and yeah, sorry they're at bars. You know, maybe host your own mics at like other places, hookah lounges. I don't know. So, but yeah, hang around other comedians, and then you just sort of absorb it, and then you try to make people laugh, and you're gonna bomb, you're gonna do terrible, and you just got to keep going up, figure out what went wrong, and try it again.
Yep.
So.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah,
I think that a lot of what you talked about obviously relates to comedians, but it's also some very universal things that you talked about in there. So we appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.